Are the Cleveland Browns about to make a decision that could make or break Shedeur Sanders before his career even begins? Because what just happened at this pro day has sparked serious debate: protect your quarterback or give him a weapon? And right now, the answer isn't as clear as it seems. The conversation around the Cleveland Browns' draft plans didn't just shift, it completely changed the moment Monroe Freeling stepped onto the field for his pro day. What was once a quiet evaluation suddenly turned into a high-stakes debate, and the presence of Browns scouts made one thing clear: this wasn't just routine scouting, this was serious interest. At first glance, Freeling looks exactly like what teams dream of at the left tackle position. Standing at 6'8" with long reach and natural athleticism, he immediately stands out. But what really caught attention wasn't just his size, it was how he moved. Smooth footwork, quick lateral movement, the kind of mobility that suggests he can handle elite pass rushers at the next level. And after a shaky NFL Combine performance where he reportedly struggled with footing, this pro day felt like a response, a statement. Freeling even addressed it himself. He admitted the Combine didn't go how he wanted, slipping, struggling to stay balanced, but instead of ignoring it, he leaned into it. Better cleats, better preparation. And this time he looked far more controlled. That alone raised eyebrows, because it showed something scouts care about just as much as talent: the ability to adjust under pressure. But it wasn't just the drills. It was the way he carried himself. Confident but not arrogant, focused but not robotic. He spoke about blocking out the noise, ignoring mock drafts, and staying locked in on improving his game. That mindset matters, especially for a team like Cleveland that's trying to build something sustainable. And for a young quarterback like Shedeur Sanders, having a lineman who's mentally composed is just as important as physical ability. Still, not everyone walked away fully convinced. Because as impressive as the tools are, the questions didn't disappear, they just got louder. Is he strong enough right now? Can he handle NFL-level power? And more importantly, is he ready to protect a quarterback from day one? That's where the tone of the conversation started to shift. Because suddenly, this wasn't just about a talented offensive lineman putting on a solid workout. This became about risk, projection, timing, and whether the Browns can afford to be patient with a player who might need time to develop. And just like that, one pro day didn't settle the debate. It ignited it. The excitement around Monroe Freeling is real, but it immediately leads to a much bigger, more uncomfortable question: can he actually protect Shedeur Sanders when it matters most? Because this isn't college anymore. At the NFL level, one weak link on the offensive line doesn't just slow you down, it completely collapses your offense. And for a quarterback like Shedeur, whose game relies on timing, pocket presence, and precision, even a split-second breakdown can change everything. We've seen it before. Talented quarterbacks with promise completely derailed because they never had time to operate. That's the fear quietly building around this situation. On paper, Freeling checks a lot of boxes: elite size, natural movement, high upside. But when you turn on the film, the conversation shifts. There are moments where his technique looks clean and controlled, but there are also snaps where he gets overpowered, where stronger defenders push through him, where the pocket starts to collapse faster than it should. And in the NFL, those moments don't just happen occasionally, they get exposed. Every single week. Now imagine that happening against elite pass rushers. Faster, stronger, more experienced, the kind of defenders who don't just test you, they target you. Suddenly, this isn't about potential anymore, it's about survival. It's about whether your quarterback can even finish a game without constantly being under pressure. And that's where the risk starts to feel real. Because drafting Freeling high means you're not just investing in what he could become, you're trusting what he is right now. And right now, there are still questions, not about his effort, not about his mindset, but about his readiness. Can he anchor against power? Can he hold the edge consistently? Can he protect a young quarterback from day one? Those aren't small concerns, those are franchise-defining questions. Because if the answer is yes, the Browns may have found their long-term solution at left tackle. But if the answer is no, then you're putting your entire offense, and more importantly, your quarterback, at risk before he even gets a real chance to develop. And that's why this decision isn't as simple as it looks. Because this isn't just about drafting an offensive lineman. It's about whether the Browns are truly ready to protect the future they're building around Shedeur Sanders. The excitement didn't last long, because the moment the film started circulating, the pushback began, and it came fast. Analysts weren't just quietly questioning the hype around Monroe Freeling, they were openly challenging it. And leading that conversation was G. Bush, who didn't hesitate to point out the risk the Cleveland Browns might be taking if they reach too high for a player who's still developing. The argument wasn't about talent. Nobody's denying Freeling has the physical tools. At 6'8" with elite movement for his size, the upside is obvious. But upside doesn't always translate immediately, and that's where the concern starts to grow. Because drafting a player in the top 10 isn't about what they might become 3 years from now, it's about what they can give you right now. And that's where the divide really started to show. Some analysts believe the Browns can't afford to gamble on potential, especially with a young quarterback like Shedeur Sanders expected to lead the offense. The logic is simple. If your quarterback is your future, you protect him with certainty, not projection. You don't take chances on a lineman who might need time to adjust when your entire offense depends on stability in the pocket. But others see it differently. They argue that elite offensive tackles are rare, and if you believe Freeling can develop into that, you take him now and trust the process. You accept the early struggles because the long-term payoff could be worth it. It's a classic NFL dilemma, immediate impact versus long-term upside. Still, even those who like Freeling admit one thing. Taking him at a premium pick feels risky. There are concerns about his strength, questions about whether he can handle NFL-level power right away, and more importantly, whether throwing him into a starting role too early could hurt his confidence instead of building it. Because once a young lineman starts struggling against elite competition, it doesn't just show on film, it affects how they play, how they react, and how quickly they develop. And that's not something you can ignore. Because this isn't happening in a vacuum, this decision is tied directly to the success or failure of the Browns' offense moving forward. If they get it right, they secure a cornerstone piece for years, but if they get it wrong, they risk setting everything back. And just when it seemed like the Browns had a clear direction, the conversation got even more complicated. Just when it felt like the Browns' decision was narrowing down, a completely different name entered the conversation, and suddenly everything changed. Carnell Tate wasn't supposed to be the center of this debate, at least not at first. The focus was on protection, on building the offensive line, on making sure Shedeur Sanders had time to operate. But the moment Tate's name started gaining traction, the entire conversation flipped. Because now, it wasn't just about protecting your quarterback. It was about empowering him. Tate represents something completely different: explosiveness, separation, big play ability, the kind of wide receiver who doesn't just fit into an offense, he transforms it. And when you start thinking about what that could look like for a young quarterback, the argument becomes a lot harder to ignore. Some analysts and even fans have started making bold comparisons, not saying he is these players yet, but suggesting the type of impact he could have. Names like Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase keep getting brought up in conversations. Elite receivers who didn't just produce, they elevated their entire offense the moment they stepped on the field. And that's the key difference. A developing offensive lineman might take time to show results, but a true number one receiver, that impact can be immediate. One route, one catch, one broken play, and suddenly the entire momentum of a game shifts. For a quarterback like Shedeur, that kind of weapon could change everything. But this is where it gets complicated. Because choosing Tate doesn't solve the protection problem, it doesn't fix the offensive line, it doesn't stop defenders from collapsing the pocket. In fact, it might even make things riskier if the line struggles. You could end up with a dynamic weapon but no time to use him. And yet, there's another side to that argument. Some believe that elite quarterbacks don't just need protection, they need playmakers, players who can create separation quickly, players who can turn short passes into big gains, players who take pressure off the quarterback by making the game easier. And if the Browns believe Tate is that kind of talent, passing on him could be a mistake they regret for years. There's also the long-term factor. Wide receivers like Tate often hit their prime early and can dominate for years. Meanwhile, offensive linemen, especially raw prospects, can take time to fully develop. So the question becomes, do you invest in immediate impact or do you bet on long-term stability? That's the dilemma no one can seem to agree on. Because both paths come with risk. Both paths come with upside. And both paths could completely change the future of this team. But the more this debate grows, the clearer it becomes that this decision isn't just about filling a need. It's about choosing an identity. There's one part of this entire conversation that isn't getting enough attention, and it might be the most important piece of all. Because while everyone is focused on upside, potential, and long-term development, the real concern with Monroe Freeling comes down to something much simpler and much more dangerous. Strength. It doesn't show up in highlight clips. It doesn't get talked about during pro day buzz, but when you slow the film down, it's there. Moments where he struggles to anchor, snaps where defenders push through him a little too easily, situations where technique alone isn't enough to hold the line. And in the NFL, that becomes a problem fast. Because at the next level, you're not dealing with college defenders anymore. You're facing elite pass rushers, players who don't just test your ability, they expose your weaknesses. Stronger, faster, more experienced. The kind of players who study your tendencies and attack them relentlessly. Now imagine putting Freeling into that environment immediately. Imagine him lining up across from someone like Myles Garrett in practice, one of the most dominant pass rushers in the league. That's not just a challenge, that's a reality check. And while competition like that can build a player over time, it can also do the opposite if they're not ready. Confidence matters more than people realize. For offensive linemen, it's everything. One bad rep can turn into two can turn into a full game of hesitation, and once that hesitation creeps in, it changes how you play. You start second-guessing your technique. You react instead of anticipating, and against elite defenders, that's all it takes to lose. That's the hidden risk. Because drafting Freeling high doesn't just mean you believe in his future, it means you're likely putting him on the field early. And if he's not physically ready, you're not just risking performance, you're risking development. There's also the timeline problem. Top draft picks aren't usually given years to slowly adjust. They're expected to contribute immediately, especially for a team trying to rebuild and stay competitive. The Browns won't have the luxury of waiting if things start going wrong. The pressure will be there from day one, fans, media, expectations, all watching closely. And that pressure can accelerate everything. Growth or struggles. Some analysts believe Freeling can absolutely develop into a high-level tackle. The tools are there, the athleticism is undeniable, but development requires time, and time isn't always something NFL teams are willing or able to give. That's why this decision feels so risky. Because if he develops properly, the Browns could secure a cornerstone player for years, a true blindside protector, the kind every franchise needs. But if they rush the process, if they put him in situations he's not ready for, they could end up doing more harm than good. And that brings the entire conversation back to one uncomfortable question. Is the upside worth the risk right now? Because in the NFL, potential doesn't protect your quarterback. Readiness does. The deeper you look at the Cleveland Browns situation, the more you realize this isn't just about one player. It's not just about Monroe Freeling. It's not just about Carnell Tate. It's about a roster that has multiple holes and no easy way to fix them all at once. Because right now, the Browns aren't one piece away. They're balancing two major offensive needs at the same time. On one side, you have the offensive line still dealing with inconsistency, long-term uncertainty, and a clear need at left tackle. On the other, you have the wide receiver room where depth is questionable and true game-changing talent is still missing. And that creates a problem. Because no matter what they do with that top pick, something is getting left behind. If they go offensive line, they're betting on protection. They're trying to give Shedeur Sanders time in the pocket, stability up front, and a foundation to build the offense around. But that doesn't fix the lack of explosive weapons. It doesn't guarantee separation downfield. It doesn't give Shedeur that go-to target when plays break down. But if they go wide receiver, now you have the opposite issue. You might get a dynamic playmaker, someone who can stretch the field, create big moments, and instantly elevate the offense. But if the offensive line struggles, if the pocket collapses too quickly, that weapon doesn't get used the way it should. Because even the best receivers can't impact the game if the quarterback doesn't have time to find them. That's the trap the Browns are stuck in. And it gets even more complicated when you consider how the draft actually works. Because this isn't just about picking the best player, it's about timing. It's about understanding positional depth. It's about knowing where the drop-off happens. Some analysts believe the gap between top-tier wide receivers and the next tier is smaller than the gap at offensive tackle. Others argue the exact opposite, that elite receivers are harder to find, and passing on one could be a long-term mistake. There's no clear consensus. And that's what makes this decision so dangerous. Then there's the trade-down scenario, something that's quietly gaining attention. The idea of moving back, collecting more picks, and still landing a top-tier player at either position sounds smart on paper. But it comes with its own risk, because once you move down, you lose control. You're no longer choosing freely, you're reacting to what other teams do. And in a draft where multiple teams have similar needs, that can backfire fast. You could miss out on both targets. You could end up settling instead of securing. And for a team in the Browns' position, that's not a risk you want to take lightly. Because this isn't just about filling gaps, it's about getting this rebuild right. Every decision is connected, every pick matters. And when you're building around a young quarterback, mistakes don't just show up in one area, they ripple through the entire offense. That's why this feels bigger than just a draft decision. It's a balancing act between present and future, between safety and explosiveness, between fixing what's broken and building what's missing. In the hardest part, there's no perfect answer. Because no matter which direction they choose, they're going to have to live with what they didn't. The moment this debate went public, the reaction wasn't quiet, it exploded. Fans didn't just pick a side, they dug in. Across social media, forums, and comment sections, the Cleveland Browns community quickly split into two very different camps. On one side, you had the fans demanding protection at all costs. The logic was simple: if you're building around Shedeur Sanders, nothing matters more than keeping him upright. No risks, no experiments, just solid, reliable protection. But on the other side, the energy felt completely different. This group wasn't thinking about safety, they were thinking about impact. They wanted explosiveness. They wanted excitement. They wanted a player who could step in on day one and completely change how defenses react. And for them, the idea of passing on a potential game-changing receiver like Carnell Tate didn't just feel risky. It felt like a mistake waiting to happen. And that's when the conversation started getting louder. Some fans began pointing to recent history, teams that invested heavily in protecting their quarterback but failed to surround them with real weapons. Others fired back with examples of quarterbacks who never reached their full potential because they were constantly under pressure. The debate wasn't just emotional, it was backed by real NFL outcomes. And neither side was backing down. Even analysts started feeding into it. Voices like G. Bush added more fuel to the discussion, questioning whether the Browns might be overthinking the situation or potentially reaching for need instead of taking the best player available. And once that idea hit the public space, it changed how people viewed the entire draft strategy. Because now, it wasn't just about choosing between two players. It became about trust. Trust in the front office. Trust in their evaluation process. Trust that they wouldn't repeat past mistakes. Some fans believe the Browns are leaning toward prioritizing protection, trying to build a foundation first before adding more weapons. Others aren't so convinced. There's a growing feeling that the team could surprise people, especially if the right playmaker is still available when their pick comes up. But here where things get interesting. The uncertainty is actually making the situation worse. Because the longer there's no clear direction, the more speculation grows. Rumors start forming, mock drafts begin shifting, and suddenly narratives take over. One report suggests the Browns are locked in on a lineman. Another hints they're seriously considering a receiver. None of it confirmed, but all of it enough to keep the conversation alive. And in today's NFL media cycle, that's all it takes. Some fans believe the team already knows what they're going to do and is just keeping things quiet. Others think the Browns themselves are still trying to figure it out. That internal uncertainty, whether real or perceived, has only added more tension to the situation. Because if the team isn't fully convinced, how can the fans be? And that's what makes this moment so critical. This isn't just a normal draft discussion anymore, it's a pressure point. A moment where expectations, opinions, and uncertainty are all colliding at once. Every angle is being analyzed, every possibility is being debated, and every potential outcome is being judged before it even happens. Which means when the decision is finally made, it won't just be evaluated. It will be scrutinized. Because if the Browns get this right, everything changes, the narrative flips, the confidence builds, the future starts to look clear. But if they get it wrong, this moment, the debates, the warnings, the arguments will all come back. And that's the part no one can ignore. Because right now, the Browns aren't just being watched. They're being judged before the pick is even in. Everything about this moment comes down to one decision, and the reality is there's no safe way out of it. Because for the Cleveland Browns, this isn't just another draft pick, this is a defining crossroads. A choice that could shape not only the future of the roster, but the trajectory of Shedeur Sanders before his career even fully begins. On one side, the logic feels almost undeniable. You protect your quarterback. You invest in the offensive line. You take a player like Monroe Freeling, trust his development, and build the kind of foundation that every successful team relies on. Because when the pocket is clean, everything works. The offense flows, the quarterback gains confidence, the entire system becomes more stable. It's the responsible choice. The disciplined choice. The move that says you're thinking long-term. But then there's the other side. The side that doesn't wait. The side that wants impact right now. Because passing on a potential game-changer like Carnell Tate isn't just about missing out on talent, it's about passing on opportunity. The opportunity to give your young quarterback a weapon who can change games instantly. Someone who can create separation, make explosive plays, and take pressure off the entire offense in a completely different way. That's not just a luxury. For some teams, that's the difference between average and dangerous. And that's what makes this decision so difficult. Because both paths make sense. Both paths solve a problem. And both paths come with consequences. If the Browns choose protection, they're betting on patience. They're trusting that development will come, that strength can be built, and that over time their investment will turn into stability. But the risk is immediate. If that development doesn't come fast enough, if the adjustment to the NFL takes longer than expected, they could be putting their quarterback in vulnerable situations early. And in this league, early struggles can change everything. But if they go the other way, if they choose explosiveness, speed, and playmaking, they're embracing a different kind of risk. They're accepting that protection might not be perfect, that there could be pressure, that their quarterback might have to adapt quickly to less than ideal conditions. And not every young quarterback survives that. That's the reality no one can ignore. Because this isn't just about who the better player is. It's about what matters more right now. Time in the pocket, or a weapon who can change the game in seconds. And here's the part that makes it even more intense. There's no second chance. You don't get to rewind this pick, you don't get to fix it later without consequences. Once the decision is made, it sets everything in motion. The narrative, the expectations, the pressure, it all follows that one moment. And if it works, the Browns look like they saw something everyone else didn't. But if it does, this exact debate, the questions, the doubts, the warnings, will come right back to the surface. That's why this isn't just a draft decision. It's a statement. A statement about how the Browns view their future, about how they plan to build around their quarterback, about whether they prioritize security or explosiveness. And in a league where margins are thin and mistakes are remembered, that choice carries more weight than anything else. Because whatever direction they take, they won't just be choosing a player. They'll be choosing the future of the franchise.